Okay, we are recording.
All right, thanks everyone for taking time to be with us here. I see a lot of familiar faces from our first overall work group kickoff meeting. So this is once again the policy subcommittee, laws and policy subcommittee meeting to discuss some of the gaps and limitations that exist between agencies, existing jurisdictions, and how we can streamline those processes to make removal an easier process for everyone. So we do have some guest speakers here. We have the vote administrator for the state of North Carolina, Major Ben Meyer, with us. Katie will provide an introduction to him shortly. And Gary Jacobs, who owns LNG Marine Services up in Lake Anna, and he has had a wealth of experience in navigating the pitfalls of vessel removal. So those are our highlights, but you all may have seen the agenda beforehand. We're mostly going to go through those things and then really open it up for discussion after we give a couple updates on what Katie and I have been working on as co-chairs for this work group. So Katie's with Clean Virginia Waterways of Long Ridge University, and I'm with the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. So thank you all again, and I'll turn it over to Katie.
Great, thank you. I would like to remind everyone to please keep your microphone on mute unless you're speaking, just so we can keep down any background noise. And just one other agenda item, we will be hearing from the team at William and Mary, who have been working on a white paper, which will be dealing a lot with what we're going to be talking about today, policies and laws as it pertains to ADVs. So we're going to start today by hearing from Ben Meyer. He is a major with the North Carolina Wildlife Service, or Department of Wildlife, excuse me. He is also the boat administrator for the state of North Carolina. He's been very helpful. We've interviewed him a couple of times about where North Carolina is in dealing with these same issues that we have. And he's agreed to share with us some highlights of their successes and their challenges. And so he'll speak for about 10 minutes, and then we will have some Q&A. And again, those of you, please go to chat and give us your name and who you're with. Later in the phone call, we'll talk, we'll find out who's on the phone. We've got a number of people joining us by phone, and we will definitely want to get your names. But at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Major Meyer from North Carolina. And let's make sure his microphone's on.
Thank you, Katie. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I appreciate the introduction, and I'm sure everybody's here because we've all had the issues with the storms recently, the past several years, and the ESF 10s and ESF 3s. And I think North Carolina had finally decided to jump into the fray as far as getting boats removed. And like everybody else knows, it's a lot easier said than done. And I have spoken with representatives from Texas, from Florida, and trying not to reinvent the wheel when we're doing this. And where we're at now in North Carolina, we actually had a emergency law that funded us with $1 million to remove vessels from Hurricane Florence, Matthew, and Michael. And the process, as most state government things go, is pretty slow. We found out right off the bat that this program is all about having the authority to do it and having the money to remove them. And even as we speak right now, we're in a, not going to say a battle, but a back and forth between legislatures to find a sustained funding source to remove all these vessels. And that is proven to be extremely difficult because everybody has money and wants something done, but nobody wants to pay for it. And that's kind of where we're at. Like I said, we did have $1 million to remove as many vessels as we could right off the bat. In fact, Katie, since we last spoke, we actually have our first contractor, Zulu Marine, that is going to be removing a 60-foot shrimp trawler at the end of this week. And that was about a $100,000 bill. And that was the lowest bid, but the best bid. And so that's taking 1/10 of our money right there with one boat. So we had to develop SOPs as far as stickering, decaling, contacting, notifying. We've worked with our Department of Environmental Quality with memorandums of agreement back and forth between lawyers. it's just been one thing after another. And like I said, I've been in contact with a lot of other states who've already done it, and they've been extremely helpful. So we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. And in North Carolina, that's kind of where we're at now. We are in this next legislative session looking at getting some money, a sustained fund. I just spoke with our chief deputy director probably about 30 minutes ago, who did inform me they were going to give us $2 million more, and that was it. Which, who knows how far that'll go. I think it'll get us past the initial boats, but then there's nothing after that. And what it comes down to is, if there's no money, you can't do a whole lot. And if the public starts complaining, they put pressure on the legislators, then they give you money. And it's kind of like a cycle. And, in speaking with Florida, that's kind of how it seems like it goes down in some of those states as well. But that's kind of where we're at. We've seen some obstacles and challenges and trying to find a sole source with the authority to do it. We're actually working with several agencies, and that's just partnering sounds good, but when you try to work together on MOAs and whose responsibility and whose liability is going to be, then it gets to be a little difficult at that point. But we are moving forward slowly, and like I said, we're having our first removal at the end of this week, and hopefully moving forward it'll get better and better. But right now we're looking at about 150 boats that we've actually identified from prior storms, which was back to Michael, Matthew, and Florence. So, and hopefully, knock on wood, that this next summer will be uneventful. Obviously, if there's in the ESF3 or removal, if that happens and it's declared emergency, we'll have some emergency funds, FEMA funds, and get reimbursed, and that'll take care of that. But sometimes that's on the back end, as we all know, and it could take a year to 2 years to get reimbursed. So that's you never know. And like I said, at the end of the day, I think what we found out is the money component of it is the biggest obstacle as far as removing vessels. And I've been on the phone with boat owners that we've decaled anywhere from, why aren't you moving my boat today, or to, how dare you sticker my boat that's been sitting here for 2 years. And it just kind of runs the gamut. And we do the best we can, but that's kind of where North Carolina's at right now. We do have a legislative piece that's in there right now for a permanent law in North Carolina, and we'll see what happens. Like I said, that we've just got 2 more million, so hopefully that'll last a while, and we can give us some time to establish some money within our own budget to fund this from year to year outside of emergencies. So like I said, that's kind of where we're at. And I'm sure some of y'all have had similar experiences if you've had to deal with it.
Well, thank you, Major Myers. Anyone who has a question, I think we're a small enough group that you can come off your and answer it. But I wanted to start with 2 quick questions. You said you've identified 150 abandoned vessels. Are these all on the water or under the water or in marshes? Or does this include some that might be on land, like in parking lots or at marinas in dry storage?
It includes all of those. It includes, even we have a component of our law that does allow us to go on private property to remove vessels, but that's obviously going to be with consent of the landowner if it's their, but if it's their boat and they want it there, there's nothing we're going to do with it. But it does allow us to go on a property owner who wants the boat removed to handle our procedure to sticker it, decal it, notify them, and go on there and remove it with a contractor. And even that's kind of contentious because there's some issues with that we're kind of running up on. But yeah, it pretty much runs all aspects of the locations of vessels right now.
Okay, great. And then the other question I had was, you talked with me before when we interviewed you about having one legal authority as opposed to multiple. In Virginia, both the Department of Wildlife Resources and Virginia Marine Resource Commission are both have some responsibilities with this. In your state, is it just your department that has the law enforcement aspect of this issue?
Well, in North Carolina, any law enforcement officer with the jurisdiction has the ability to enforce this law. And that's fine. It's just when it comes to the procedure to remove them, that has been left with us, because you can't have 5 different ways of doing it, because then people get confused. So, and even some of our counties have the ability to do this and establish local laws to remove vessels. So if they're going to do it, we just won't. And we're in contact with those counties, but like we're out there we have a North Carolina Marine Patrol who enforces the recreational commercial fish or commercial fishing, and they can go out there with us and sticker vessels and do everything we do. They just do it according to our.
Quick question for you.
Again,
When you did the upstairs training room, the projector project off the grant, you know what I'm talking about?
your microphone, can you do that, Jeff? Okay. Okay, so Major, and anyone else have any questions at all about the process in North Carolina? Okay. Well, then I actually did have one more question. When you talked about funding these programs, and you talked about 150 ADVs that you know of right now, and that's without another storm pending, how much manpower, how many hours does this take? What I'm leading to is, could this be a full-time person, a full-time position dealing with this issue if you had the funds?
The way we operate is we just send the list out to our officers in the field. And for the most part, an investigation can take up to 90 days, and it is time consuming, but we're not going to get any increase in personnel out of this. I'm not saying it couldn't, but it is, when it's a priority, it's a priority. And if it's in the middle of hunting season, then they go out and do this, or in the middle of boating season. But so far we've been able to go after these boats and do the efforts with our current staff right now. But we have been partnering with a lot of other employees in our agency with our engineering section, our land and water section, that have helped as well as far as monitoring the database and things like that. But the boots on the ground guys are out there, putting the stickers on the boats and that kind of thing. So, and we've managed it, reasonably without a whole lot of time spent on just one thing, but it could be potentially time consuming.
Okay, and earlier you did share with us the decals and the notices, so we can put that on our website. So anybody who's interested in the language you developed, we can share that with everybody there. Again, anybody have questions about the funding or the procedures or SOP in North Carolina?
Yeah, this is Lee Peters, Stafford County Sheriff's Office. You mentioned before that there was kind of a local law enforcement and you guys were doing the same thing, only kind of separately. Can you expound on that again? Because you said something about, if local law enforcement's doing it, then you kind of leave to them. If you guys are doing it, you leave it to yourselves. How is that partnership working?
Okay, so in North Carolina, the counties have the ability to create their own ADV laws. They've had that for a while. It's just most counties don't, because they don't have any money. Brunswick County, which is a coastal county, they have a good enough tax base and enough complaints where they actually develop a budget to remove some of their high priority vessels. Now, they run out of money pretty quick, and they'll handle them a lot quicker than we will most times, because their sheriff's department can pretty much do what they want to. And moving forward, a lot of people thought that might be a conflict, but as long as the county is going to do it, they have their own established procedures, which is very similar to ours, and they have absolute authority to handle that within their jurisdiction. But they'll tell us, man, when we run out of money, we're not going to do it, and that's where we partner with them, and we prioritize boats, and we will go move them according to our procedures. And so far, Captain Peters, it's worked out. Could that potentially be an issue? It could, but we've worked with those guys great. And as long as you know who's doing what from the outset, we have not had a problem so far. And like I said, everybody's limited on money. So I think this is a a group effort anyway, because we're all getting complaints and we all want to see the boats move. We have the same goal. And I don't think anybody I don't think anybody's egos gets too involved as long as the job gets done, but that could change. But so far we have not.
And the county is funding the removal and disposal themselves, is what you're saying?
If they go out and handle the procedure, they have a budget to remove vessels. Now, they're not going to do all of them, and we're doing a lot of the ones they do the ones that are more of a navigational hazard that they need to move right now. The ones that necessarily aren't, they're not going to be a high priority. And if they don't have the money to do those, then hopefully we can come in and get those as well. So all of them will get removed eventually.
And that's both land, water issues, the entire gamut is what you guys are covering.
Right. And when I say land, if there's a boat sitting on somebody's property that's a piece of junk, we're not going to mess with that. These are, if it's in marshes or on somebody's property that has washed up and it's abandoned, we have the authority to do that. But if we just went around picking up junk boats, we would never, that would be the only job we ever did. So it's a little nuance when it comes to on land.
Oh, well, we have the issue of commuter lots and roadways and things like that. People just go and dump boats. So that's kind of what we're battling as well. So I was wondering if you guys got into that too.
We didn't, because I mean that almost becomes a littering problem, and it becomes an abandoned property problem that's kind of maybe outside the scope of an abandoned and derelict vessel. It's just more like trash at that point. And I'm not saying that it couldn't be eventually, but right now we've had, like Camp Lejeune, they just had people come dump boats in their PX parking lot, and we're like, hey man, just get rid of it. I mean, we're not going to do that. So, but they did ask us that. So we hadn't gotten to that far. I don't know if we want to go that far or not.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Okay, well, I hate to, I have so many. You mentioned that you have an inventory of 150. How did you create that inventory?
Well, we actually partnered with the Coast Guard during Hurricane, I think it was Florence. When we were doing ESF-10, we used aerial photography to take befores and afters. And that's the main way we identified ADVs from those storms. And we used that database to establish, and I mean, obviously we went out and assessed every single vessel. And this was a group effort as well, to do that and identify them, take pictures, GPS them. We actually put together a GPS database with a reportable database with all this information in it. So we actually have public access, so they can pull up a GPS and look at the boat and see where it's at. Obviously limited to personal identifiers, but that's kind of how we keep track of it. It's not easy, and it's a lot of effort to build that database, but that's been 2.5 years, 3 years in the making. And we're seeing that the benefits of those efforts at this point, because it makes it a lot easier to track these boats.
Great. So you didn't have any problems with privacy? If you had an abandoned boat, you had no problem sharing that location and perhaps photos?
No, I mean, it's on Google Maps, basically Google Earth, and that's just kind of how we did it. I mean, if there's, if somebody has an issue with their Google Earth picture, I think there's a way to, so you can blur it out. But we've never had an issue with that. The only issue we have is personal identifiers. In North Carolina, you can't release certain numbers issued to the public, and we have to just to be careful about that. But it's not too much of a problem.
Okay, and from what you said earlier, it sounds like you're prioritizing not abandoned boats in parking lots, but what, in the water, bringing them up, things like that?
Navigational hazards, sensitive areas, places. Obviously, complaints raise the priority of a certain vessels. It does. I won't say it doesn't. So calls to legislatures and other people of importance will get them moved up. But we really tried to prioritize the ones that are safety first and sensitive areas and things like that. Obviously, all the hazardous material has been removed, so that's not a problem. And we just, that's kind of how we prioritize them right now.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. Any last call for questions?
I have a question, Mr. Meyer. How did you get authority to salvage the boats without incurring any liability when you do that?
Well, I mean, we have liability. There's always negligence. But basically the authority piece through law gave us the right, after you follow the procedure of stickering, decaling, notifying. Once you do that, and it can be up to a 90-day procedure, it can. Once you do that, the law basically gives you ownership of the boat. And there's even an appeal for private citizens to appeal it. There's extensions we've given them to do it, but basically our law says that once you're notified by certified mail return receipt or hand delivered, you have 30 days to contact us and begin some kind of proactive action to remove the vessel. And you can have an extension just out of extenuating circumstances, say you're out of town or whatever. But after that, after that process, if you do not respond, there is, it basically gives us ownership and the authority to remove a boat. And there's always going to be liability, and people can sue you for anything. And we understand that. We're probably going to wind up with some kind of civil hearings and things like that for them to appeal. But, there's liability in everything. And that was one of the issues we had working with other agencies, because everybody wanted us to have all the liability, which I understand that. But, the contractors will be liable as well. But our liability falls within just the legal authority to remove the vessel and making sure it's the correct one. But obviously we carry a lot of tort liability insurance, no doubt.
So you have insurance to cover any liability?
We have insurance, tort liability insurance we do. And but that's just the nature of this, no different than the highway patrol removing cars on the side of the road. It's just, there's always going to be some liability in everything state government does. We just try to, that's why you have attorneys to help you cover your bases on that. Sure. And they've been, very proactive in writing the laws and writing the SOP, writing the MOAs with us to mitigate the liability or place it where it needs to be. And it's on us to make sure we do the correct procedure so there's no liability there.
Okay. And you say you sticker the boats. Now, if they're submerged, say 20 feet, how do you get around that? Or what do you do about that?
You don't. And it's one of those deals. I mean, that's, if you can do it, we sticker them, decal them. If there's no way to contact the person, we just do the best we can. But most submerged boats, I mean, we hadn't got to the point where we had submerged boats that we couldn't identify. And as long as you can identify them or know what they are, you can make a contact. And all our law says you have to contact the last registered owner. Right. And we do the best we can as far as a sufficient investigation. But if the boat hadn't been registered in 20 years and the registered owner, you can't get up with them, then by the law, by the end of that 30 days, we take ownership.
Okay. Thank you.
Katie, could I ask a quick question? You mentioned that you do prioritize according to navigational hazards, sensitive areas. So when you say sensitive areas, do you automatically mean if it's in a marsh or a wetland, or do you mean if there's some other water quality impact? I'm not sure what all goes into that assessment.
That would be, we work with Department of Environmental Quality, and they are the experts on the sensitive areas, and they actually provide those areas to us. But it's going to be marshes, certain types of wetlands that are identified as sensitive areas, and we do rely on their assessment of that. And if they say, hey, it needs to be moved sooner rather than later for environmental reasons, then we move it up. And that, I mean, that's it. You have to have that kind of partnership in
right.
this, no doubt.
Thank you.
All right, last call for questions. Anybody else have any questions for the Major?
Katie, it's Gary with LNG Marine Service. Major, how did you get the laws written? We have several laws in regards to titling and destruction of private vessels. The standard code is Code of Virginia 29.1-733.25. That's every vessel must be titled, and it's acquiring a title for a vessel. For us to dispose of it, it's 18.2-146, which puts us into an OODA loop, because then it refers back to you must receive title. We had a process worked out with Department of Wildlife. And Tom, that's what I called you about earlier this week to see that policy change. How do you get out of this loop? Because it cost us, we have to run a ad in a legal section of a newspaper, which cost about $300. We have to do the registered letter notification. But the problem I just ran into was we had some impounds the start of this year, December, and the process that we have used where we would call in, we would get the last registered owner's information, because in 29.1-733.25, it has to be retrieved directly from Game and Fisheries. It's still listed as Game and Fisheries, but DWR. How we're now no longer able to do that through our system that we had, it's been changed. We have to now hand carry paperwork to DWR or mail it in. And it can take up to 14 to 21 days, which as a salver, that doesn't affect me as much as when we're doing our law enforcement impounds for the abandoned and derelict boats that are in parking lots, yards, common areas, things of that nature. We have to notify within 48 hours. We have to receive this information and have the registered letter sent out that the vessel and trailer were impounded. How did you rewrite those regulations so that it didn't put us into this endless loop where we can never dispose of a vessel?
So Gary, North Carolina has a similar law if you want to take ownership. In North Carolina, the contractors to dispose of a vessel never take ownership of the boat.
Okay.
But we do not, and I'm talking about if you're doing, take it to a landfill or whatever, there is never a transfer of ownership to the contractor. The law gives us the law, the procedures you go through establishes ownership with the Wildlife Commission after that time has passed. And once we have the sole ownership of the vessel until it's destroyed, and once it's destroyed, we remove that title from our records. So the contractors never have to deal with that aspect of it when they're doing the ADVs. Now, if you want to take ownership of a boat to sell or use personally or whatever else, then you have to go through a similar procedure in North Carolina to get the title and registration in your name. But just to remove a boat as being contracted out for us, you do not.
Oh, okay. I understand that, Major. Yeah, because 18.2-146 specifically deals with destruction. For us to destroy it, we have to have a title to it. The landfills won't take it without a title. The landfills around here now won't even take boats. Literally, they have specification. It has to be cut up 24-inch by 24-inch squares, and it has to be disposed of in a dumpster. No hazardous materials, no motor, no metal, no cable, no wiring. Basically, it has to be stripped.
Right,
and that's no problem.
And in North Carolina, when we were bidding these out, we just make sure the contractors know that to build that in their bid. Because we understand the cost of ADVs, a lot of it's going to be in the destruction of it or disposal of it. That's where a lot of the costs are. And don't let it sit somewhere and get mold. Then you have to mitigate that. So, and I know they had an issue in Florida with that. I mean, it was a nightmare. And we hadn't run into that yet, but we just tell the contractors to build that into the bid, and that's part of it. No doubt. That's why it's so expensive.
All right. And thank you for your time.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Major. If you could stay with us for the rest of the call, that would be great. If you can't, we certainly understand. But again, thank you for your insights. And at this point, I wanted to share with you just some things we heard from marinas. Jeff from Coastal Zone Management Program and I have been interviewing some marina owners to get their point of view, because we've learned a lot of these vessels are abandoned at marinas. We've spoken to, I think, 4 or 5 so far. And they too are frustrated with the process of being able to legally, get rid of these. One fellow said that his marina actually hauls abandoned vessels out of the water before they sink, and they put them in their yard just as kind of like a public service to keep them from becoming a bigger problem. And then they have to go through what they quote, they say, the laborious and expensive bureaucratic process of getting the owner to dispose of the boats. And when they can't find the owner, then this marina takes the next step and usually landfills the boats. They also, a couple have said that when they have a boat that was never registered in Virginia, they have to not only understand the Virginia laws and regulations, but they're required to learn those of other states. We've talked to a couple of marinas that changed hands, and when the new owners bought the marina, they ended up with a number of abandoned vessels, either in the water or on the land. One marina suggested it would be very helpful if there were clear state laws or policies that marinas could point to, rather than say, hey, you're a good guy, I'm a good guy, but you can't leave your vessel here unless you show this level of insurance, because it's a state law. Actually, we heard that from a couple marinas, that they would like to have some stronger laws that they could point to. I'm trying to think of some other things we heard. One marina owner wondered if the boats could be repurposed legally. Once they take ownership, can they turn them into like a bed and breakfast or something, a place where people could rent and spend the night. So lots of questions out there. One marina also said that it would be really wonderful to recommended language for leasing agreements or marriage agreements, ones that clearly say, if you, the owner, don't come back or don't pay your bills, then this is the process that we will take ownership of your vessel if you abandon it here. Especially some of the smaller marinas, we kind of learned that this is a bigger problem with the smaller, less expensive marinas, as opposed to ones that are attached to real estate. Like if you buy a condo, you get a slip in the marina. Those seem to be more regulated locally. So that's some of the feedback we've gotten so far from marinas. And I was wondering, especially those of you at William & Mary who are working on the white paper, were there any questions you have that we should be asking about when we talk to the marina owners?
Well, I'm going to hand this over. I'm Elizabeth Andrews. I direct the Virginia Coastal Policy Center at William & Mary Law School, and I'm going to hand this over to my student research assistant, Anthony Cusato, and also Jesse Reiblich, who's our postgraduate fellow, that are doing the research on this project.
Yep. Hi, everybody. So, Kate, what was your question? If we have any questions that we should ask the marina owners?
Right. Well, based on what we heard them say, that they wish they could point to state regulations or policies. A couple of them said, this is almost like a club. We know these people, we've known them for a long time. And it's harder to be tough with a new regulation or a new rental agreement. But it would be easier for them if they could say, hey guys, I'm required to do this. We're required to ask these things of you. So as we continue to talk to marina owners, just wondered if there's anything particular from your point of view as you're working on the white paper that we should be gathering information about.
I mean, is it a big issue? I'm Jesse Reiblich from Virginia Coastal Policy Center. Is it a big issue for marina owners, or is it less so because they have, people who typically would take care of their boats more than someone who might leave it elsewhere or have it stored elsewhere? Is it a big issue? Did you hear feedback that they're having an issue? And is it something that's tied to just losing track? So is it something where The people have literally abandoned their boat and left it there without paying anymore to store it, or without any forwarding address sort of thing?
I think we've heard all of the above. One marina owner said an issue is older people tend to own boats more than younger people. And sometimes people have a boat at a dock tied up or in a marina for years and they never go on it once. And then when that person maybe dies or moves, they just basically walk away from the boat. We've heard also there's cases where a boat will sink or partially submerge, and the owners thought that they had insurance that would cover that, and they found out they didn't, and all of a sudden they don't have money. So I think we've heard every kind of abandonment. Sometimes it sounds very willful, like, oh, I just want this slip for 2 months, and I'll come back in 2 months and pay for more, and then they never come back.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious what level of insurance they require. So if they do require the insurance that will have CETO or Boat US come and actually float the boat up, which is very expensive, I assume, or what other kinds of requirements they have for next of kin. So listing next of kin or some other emergency contact, if they require that currently, or if so yeah, kind of what their procedures are now, because this seems more of like just on the business policy level as opposed to legal side. So what they do to kind of cover their bases currently, and what they might want to do as this becomes more of an issue, like you said, an aging population where they might lose track of who owns the boat and what to do. And then it becomes this issue where there's a lot of requirements, as we heard from, I can't remember the individual, but we just heard someone mention from Gary, who said that it's a big issue trying to take actual ownership and trying to do something with the boat after it becomes derelict.
Well, that's a good point. And maybe that's a side project that this work group can look at, is recommendations for marinas on what should and should not be included in their business documents, as opposed to state policy. So that's a good point.
Yeah, I was just gonna jump on,
Katie,
like, I think it would be.
add something in real quick? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go. I was
Go
gonna
ahead.
jump. It would be helpful to know what exactly they have like in their contracts for like leasing a slip, to know like what their policies are for, if they have anything like on their actual contracts for, if you abandon a vessel, you do this. Cause I agree with Jess, that might be more helpful than them trying to kind of get a different law passed for them to like kind of streamline their ownership. That also might, in tandem might be helpful. I don't know. So it sounds like from what you were saying, they want something else on the Virginia code to make it easier on them. I don't know if they have any specifics on what they would like maybe a reduction in the amount of like notice you have to give. As Garrett's mentioning, it's I think I'd have to pull up the exact date, but it's a couple of weeks of notice for like a private party to take ownership of a vessel. So I don't know if they have any like specific things in that like taking ownership code that would be helpful for them to be changed.
Well, we'll review our notes and see if they did have specifics like you're asking for. And Tom Guest, you wanted to speak about this?
Yeah, I just want to give another perspective as well. There's another law, it's the Storage Act. And technically a lot of marinas fall under the Storage Act because the boats are essentially in storage, but marinas sometimes don't like to go that route because it's easier to take title of the vessel. But that's not always the right answer, because the problem is we've had marinas try to take title of a vessel that had a lien on it, and the previous owner doesn't own it, the bank owns it. And we've actually been jammed up where a boat went to auction that had a lien on it, and for some reason it didn't get caught, which causes all kinds of potential lawsuits and issues there. So, when you're looking at a junky boat that, that's obviously damaged, like for instance, when Delegate Ranson's family bought that marina up on the Northern Neck, she had 25 or 30 boats that were just absolutely junk. And it would be easier if there was a way that we could transfer ownership to her so she could do away with the vessels, especially in cases where people send her emails and letters saying, please take the boat, I don't want it. But we got to be really careful with just opening up the floodgate, because we also have situations where a neighbor doesn't like a neighbor and they try to steal their boat from them through the abandoned boat process. So it gets a little bit hinky when that kind of thing happens. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but there is the Storage Act as well. So that's something we need to look at. And but just like North Carolina, I mean, it's about a 30-day process, maybe a little bit longer, 45 days if you really work through it. But and then for the towboat guy, I was supposed to call him. I've got a note to call him, but that's really just an internal process that I need to walk down the hall and talk to somebody, and we'll get that straightened out with y'all and our law enforcement folks, because that shouldn't be a hand carried thing. That should be able to be a phone call, and we'll get that back to the way it was, I hope.
Great.
Question real quick though, to one of Jesse's points, does Virginia require boats to carry insurance? Because I think there's some confusion on that too, because if you look it up, it says no, but there may be a requirement. So if there is no requirement and people are abandoning,
No, there isn't.
There isn't?
But a
No, the
marina
only
could
time
require it.
only insurance required on a boat is when it's got a lien on it, and that's by the bank. But there is no liability requirement. Most states don't have any insurance requirements for boats.
Are marinas are required to have insurance for slip, people that use their slips for any kind of abandonment or problems with their boats, leave them there?
I imagine marinas are probably just going to be a liability policy, but I don't really know if they have anything that covers the boats and the slips or not.
Katie, I think it's probably a good time to point out that policy options are going to be a balancing act. So one example, Katie's heard from the marinas. They want state law that spells out you have to have insurance when you dock your boat at our marina, and et cetera, because that means they can fall back on that and say, look, the state's making me do this. I'm the bad guy here. The state, I mean, we hear that all the time in other places. I'm not disparaging that. I'm just saying that that's a real issue. On the other hand, the state may not want to get into the intricacies of contracts between marinas and the boats. That's going to be a policy decision for the legislature, right? Obviously, in the past, they haven't done that. Tom made reference to sometimes this is about a neighbor trying to get a neighbor's boat. They don't like the neighbor, whatever. I remember that back in the dark ages when it was DGIF, that, sometimes it was maybe somebody was overseas on assignment and hadn't, kept it up as much as they'd like, and they come back and it was a nice boat. And now sometimes a marina operator wants to get a hold of the boat too, to sell to an employee on the cheap. So there are all kinds of outliers like that. And we're gonna have to figure out what policy recommendations that encompass the most interest, maybe is one way to look at it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I also saw a law, I'm not sure which state it was in because I've been reading a lot of these in the last couple of weeks, but they had a law that said if a boat is assessed at worth $100 or less by a professional who knows boats, then there's a different set of rules that kick in. I mean, basically they're trying to really get to those abandoned boats that are worth nothing, to avoid that problem. I think that you brought up, Elizabeth, where someone says, yeah, this boat's abandoned, let's sell it for $10 and it's worth $30,000.
Right. Well, and then I saw the note in the chat about in South Carolina, one thing they ran into is when the requirements were too onerous at the marinas, people go out and anchor offshore. And Jesse was telling me in Florida, right, they have issues with people abandoning offshore. They just anchor it, and that's the path to a bad thing right there. It just goes downhill and they can't move it anymore. So there are a number of these policy issues that are going to have two sides to it, it seems like. And we just got to figure out the best approach. Interesting stuff that just came out of North Carolina. Thank you for that. At the right time, Jesse and Anthony can fill you in on their discussion with a representative of the boating insurance industry and their insights.
If I can ask a question for law enforcement, what are the penalties if you are caught abandoning a boat, like on a marsh or just on somebody's property or something like that? Are there penalties for that? Any law enforcement?
I mean, in Virginia, this is Jamie Green with the Virginia Marine Police. I'm a captain in Central. It goes to General District Court, and if you get an additional charge on them, the first one is a Class 3 misdemeanor, which is typically not a very big charge, maximum $500 fine. The second offense within 12 months is a Class 1 misdemeanor, but usually, more often than not, the courts just defer it, just keep giving them more time. Or if they give them a conviction, we don't typically get a notice served on them that they have to remove the vessel. So it's an ongoing issue. It never really goes away. Very rarely do we see the courts basically give a mandate that the boat be removed, or they'll continued charges will be coming for every day it's on the bottom. I did see it in Norfolk one time when we were cleaning Willoughby up. When they had all the boats on the bottom, we had city council was helping us, and they were having problems with the judges dismissing them all, and they threatened to unseat all the judges. And then at that point, they made a move, and where we had some success, and the city helped us a lot. But that's the only time I've ever seen it with all the boats that I've dealt with.
Thank you.
I think part of that also goes back to one of our original problems of being able to identify who owns that boat. So in our area, you know, if it's parked, if it's sunk, or if it's anywhere else, you know, we call to remove it, or we try and find who owns it. We go back to the same problem of it hasn't been registered by the last owner. You know, it hasn't been in somebody's name in 10 years or whatever. So if we could find somebody to charge, then we could get to the problem they're having down there. But we can't get to that problem because we can't find out who owned it.
Yeah, I'll echo what the officer's saying. So we have the same problem, but in the event where we do know who it is, which is rare, it is rare. So, but most of the time it's hard to pinpoint an owner. Either what we've ran into, it's the marks have been removed off the vessel. A lot of times the serial numbers or the name, if it was documented, and all that stuff has been removed. Or in some events, the owner or the responsible party was in a nursing home and deemed incompetent for us to be held, or not competent to be held liable in the court of law for a criminal case. And we're a police department, so we can only do the criminal side of it.
I know in North Carolina, speaking of this, I mean, just because we have a new law, we've honestly, and I hate to say this, we've had more luck charging people with littering, felony littering. But that, like everything else, when that goes to court, it just, nothing becomes of it. Most of the people with these boats anyway don't have any money that you can get if they had it. And it's kind of a never ending cycle. And even in our law, it's, we have liability, strict liability with the boat owners, but trying to find the boat owner. And then if you find them and you get them to court with a charge, they don't have any money to pay. And it just comes right back on the state. It's kind of a never ending cycle, which is why the funding component of anything like this is vital. And it's very frustrating. There's no doubt.
Major, did North Carolina take a look at an additional fee for boaters that's maybe collected in conjunction with paying the boat registration fee?
Katie, we looked at increasing boat registrations. We looked at mandatory insurance. We've looked at raising gas tax, and the legislature said absolutely not any of them. That is a no-go. And that's just where we're left at right now. We did talk about, because in North Carolina, same thing, there's no mandatory insurance because a lot of boats aren't worth insuring until they're there and the state has to take care of it. But all of those were proposed. There just is not a will to do that. There's not a will to raise taxes or anything else, which it kind of just circles back to, we just have to find some money to move them. And if we can charge somebody and they have money and we get some, then good, but 99% of the time, that's probably not going to happen. And I can assure you, nobody's going to sit in jail for months for a derelict vessel.
Right.
Hey, Major, did you guys look at the laws as it pertains to removal and the transfer of ownership from abandoned cars? and the laws on boats? And did you find a great disparagement in between those two? And if so, did you guys look at how to reconcile that so that the ease of getting rid of a car or having a tower take over the ownership of a car and the ease of taking over a boat were more similar? Because it seems like most states have a very simple law that if a car is abandoned, if it's towed, they go to DMV, they send a letter, 30 days, it's theirs. With boats, we see that's very, very different. Did you guys look at that and see that was unreasonable or it didn't make any sense to you?
Well, we did, and basically the thing is, a car is worth something. Boats are worth absolutely nothing, and not only are they worth nothing, they cost $10,000 to move. So, you know, when I worked for the sheriff's office, you had rotations fighting over who can go pick up a truck because it's worth money. With a boat, they're a money pit. I mean, it costs money, and we tried to align our laws to that, and we pointed to that in creating it, but the ability, it's so much easier to move a car because it's sitting there on the side of the road. You pick it up on a rollback and move it. Where a boat, it takes a contractor $90,000 in 2 weeks to move it. That's the difference, and that's just where we're at. And if we could figure out a way to make fiberglass and old wood worth something, then we'd be golden. But right now, it's not.
Tom, didn't you have an opinion on as far as not attaching a fee to the registration and making it separate?
Yeah, and it's actually not an opinion. It's it can't be done by the recreational boating safety grant that all the states get. It's money that we get that's transferred through the recreational boating safety trust fund to states to do basically the piece of the Coast Guard's mission that they can't do, and they let the states do it, which is law enforcement, education, access, and title and registration. So in Virginia, between us and VMRC, we spend almost $7 million of state boating funds. I think VMRC spends about 1 million or just above, and then we spend the rest with title and registration and all that stuff. But we get about $2 million back, and then a chunk of that goes to them. But if you add a fee, a hidden fee, or even a not hidden fee to a registration for anything other than registering the boat, you lose eligibility for that money. And there's 5 or 6 other states that are jammed up because of that with the Coast Guard, and they're trying to rectify that. So the caution is if you use a user fee, it's got to be separate from the registration, even if it's at the same time. And it's got to be very transparent as to what that's used for. And, you know, just the problem, though, is with the legislative system, once you put that into the system, all it takes is 1 or 2 amendments while it's going through the process that you have no say-so on, and you end up with a bill that's got a fee attached to your registration. So it's typically that legislative process where things go south. And we see it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other concern that I have is those states that did that, I think it only applies to state registered boats. So in Virginia, we've got about 250,000 state registered boats. Your average boat is 16 to 26 feet, with most of those being trailerable. But we have tons and tons of documented vessels that aren't paying into that system, which, you know, when you lose a documented vessel like Ben said down in North Carolina, that's $100,000 job to move that boat, where if it's a 21-foot trailerable boat, it might be a $10,000 job. So in my opinion, we should figure out how to make them pay in just like everybody else. And that's going to be having to work with the Coast Guard, I imagine, because we have a lot of documented vessels in Virginia as well, pleasure and commercial.
Thank you.
The biggest sunk vessel we have now that I'm aware of is a trawler, that it's a documented vessel in Sarah Creek, and I think it's probably 85 feet long, and it's been sunk for quite a while. The owner of the vessel passed on it during a fire, and so it sank, and obviously still sitting there, and it's relatively large.
All right, well, I think at this point, we're going to move to the next agenda item, but we do have open discussion at the end of today's meeting. So at this point, I'm going to ask Jeff to give a recap of the work he's doing, and then we'll hear from William and Mary about what they've learned about vessel insurance and the process on the white paper so far.
All right, thanks, Katie, and thanks everyone so far for your input. It's been great. My immediate task here is putting together inventory from existing sources, and those include the Coast Guard, the folks at Smith Meadow Lake, thanks Neil, Ed Tillett, who's distributing our survey that we've put together that I previewed with y'all at the last meeting, to marina owners, and then reaching out to some folks at Lake Anna this coming week and having a meeting and seeing what they've got. So really adding all these things to the Coast Guard's existing spreadsheet, which has some, goes back to 2013 and reported vessels that were all triggered search and rescue missions, as they outlined this very costly process, especially if it's a repeat vessel. So that was the impetus behind their inventory. So some of them, might be resolved, but in general, the number that just sticks out is 178 vessels they've identified, and that would just be in coastal waters. So just that's the number to kind of wrap your head around. As Major Meyer had said, about 150 in North Carolina. So we've got a couple more and just from the Coast Guard. So we're looking to add and sync those two inventories to, for the smaller inventories plus the crowdsourcing survey form to add to the Coast Guard's main inventory. And I can say it came up earlier with prioritization. That'll be the next step later on. The Coast Guard, from what I could tell with their columns and their headers, they didn't have a yes or a no or high or low priority. They just had the basic information and identification as they were able to find it in description. So that's really what I've got right here. And we'll be working to populate that and update it with those survey forms that automatically come in. I can see the responses from that Google form. So we did invite additional comments. I can update that survey form in real time, and the link will always be the same. So we're always welcome to new ideas as they come up, to ways to improve the survey and therefore improve the criteria that will govern how that spreadsheet is laid out. That's all I got. Katie?
Yeah, just one last point about the inventory. We're creating a flyer, which we are going to just get out to all the marinas and local law enforcement and everyone we can think of. It has a QR code where anyone can just pop up against the poster or the flyer, and it will take them directly to our online survey. We also have the inventory survey for people who prefer to use paper. You can mail it or you can email it to people. So 180 marinas that we asked them to fill it out by the end of April, so that when the white paper is done from William and Mary around May, we'll have the beginning of an image share. So at this point, let's hear from William and Mary about the white paper and where they are and what they could use help with from those of us on the call. So Jesse or Anthony or Elizabeth?
Yeah, so we're working on this white paper. The main things we're going to talk about are the current Virginia laws, which a lot of which we've already covered today. The approaches from other states, again, we've already kind of covered today, especially that information from North Carolina is very helpful. Thank you, Major Meyer. And then we're also going to talk about funding, which seems to kind of be, as we've talked about, kind of the elephant in the room. Policy is great, but if you don't have the money to remove these things, it's not going to be super helpful. So those are the main things we are going to cover. I think we might have room to cover other topics depending on how this goes. So if anybody has something else they think they might want in there, let us know. We can see if it'll fit. We're trying to, we unfortunately we don't have the time to cover everything that, could come up with this issues, but those are the main three things we're going to fund. So any, additional information from other state approaches would be very helpful. It's actually really helpful. Again, thank you, Major Meyer, for learning we were thinking about, having that fee on the registration getting rounded, but if the legislators can be so opposed to that as North Carolina's is, that might be something we need to rethink.
For funding, Anthony, it might be helpful to add that there is a funding subcommittee, right, Katie and Jeff? And so it will be important that I think maybe what we do is try to, and Anthony, I think you're planning to attend those meetings as well, right? So it would be
Yes.
helpful that that group's work will feed into what, he can analyze. Does that recommendation from that subcommittee, is that provided for in Virginia law? Or is there something that's needed to be tweaked? Because otherwise funding in and of itself, as you know, is a whole subcommittee's worth of work. So to try to make cross-pollination between the two subcommittees, that would be my suggestion, that he take whatever recommendations come out of the funding subcommittee that they fully researched and think are the best fit for Virginia. And then he can analyze, does the law today support that or amendments needed? How does that sound?
Right, and that funding subcommittee, they're meeting next week, Friday, February 19th at 1 p.m. And it's open to anyone who's interested in either serving on it or listening. And they'll be looking at, I know Maryland has an excise tax. The day you buy a vessel, a boat, you pay a 5% extra fee that helps with their ADV program. So they'll be looking at what other states have done to fund their issues. And we'll send out that link again to the entire work group for anyone who's interested. All right, any other thoughts, comments, questions about the white paper? And it will include, right, a list of recommendations, not my law, but recommendations on what should be in or be considered in a future law.
Yes, it'll have recommendations. You blipped out a little bit there, so I'm not sure. You said not something I didn't understand. I'm sorry, but it would include recommendations at the end.
Can somebody explain for the rest of us maybe what exactly a white paper is and what you do with it? I'm not really familiar with that.
A white paper is just a term for a policy paper, really a research paper that talks about the various options and will have recommendations, just to distinguish it between a scientific paper or any other type of paper. It's a policy paper, just to give you some background on the issue.
And does it go out to certain organizations, or how does that work?
Well, we can do it however this group wants to proceed. Normally, when VCPC does research and produces papers, we publish them to our website. In fact, I'm happy to provide that link to you in the chat box, and you can see the kinds of papers that we posted on various water quality issues, coastal resilience issues, aquaculture. We do a variety of coastal issues. So that's where I would suggest posting it, but I'm going to wait to hear guidance from Katie on how she'd like to have this used or handled.
Right, well, we certainly want to share it widely. It will be also put on the web page that's run by Clean Virginia Waterways. When we get to the point where we have a policy paper with policy recommendations, we will then have a separate conversation on who can advocate for it, who can go to delegates and senators. Many of us on this work group cannot do that because of our employment, but there are other entities, nonprofits that can take up that torch and, find a senator, a delegate to sponsor legislation. But that's a conversation probably for the summer, as who will take this policy paper and turn it into some kind of action.
And I'll add to that, everyone, Katie and I have been discussing other elements, and to Elizabeth's point about cross-pollination between the two working groups, the sort of the economic impact. So not just the cost of removal, but the process that the marinas are going through, and it wouldn't just be focused on their requests and needs, but to look at, working waterfronts overall, resiliency. Louis Lawrence brought up a point in the previous work group meeting about the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, and how those projects for vessel removal that could become something that would be dislodged in a storm and breach a bulkhead or some other private property would be something to consider. So putting a price tag on this beyond just the eyesore or the navigational hazard, beyond the removal cost, like I said earlier, and then the Coast Guard search and rescue, but getting some numbers, and that can help inform those later advocates as they choose. So we have the recommended policies and then the sort of the urgency behind why we're doing this, not just for the environment, but because of it's a larger problem that costs a lot of money. So
Great. I'm glad you brought that up because some people are motivated by destruction to marshes. Some are motivated by navigational hazards, but a lot of decisions are made based on economics. So yes, we are concurrent with the work being done by William and Mary. We are doing this economic estimation. That's all we can do is estimate. And that's one of the questions we're asking marinas is, have abandoned boats impacted your bottom line through either a slip that you can't rent because you've got an abandoned boat there, or people come to your marina and like, oh my God, look at this place. It's got some really ugly boats. So we're trying to quantify economic impacts of this. And if you have any case stories or stories along that line, please share them with us. We definitely want to be very specific about some of the real costs of these.
Have you been in contact with the Virginia Dare on Smith Mountain Lake Marina?
No, not that.
You might want to speak to them. They have a rather large boat tied up to their docks that's partially submerged, and he can't rent that slip, and he's very concerned about that.
Okay, we're so far we've mostly concentrated on tidewater coastal marinas, but yes, we definitely want to get. I mean, this is a problem throughout the state, obviously. So thank you, Neil.
Sure.
All right,
thanks, Neil. Yeah, we've been in touch about those marinas, so we're looking them up. Thanks.
Okay, if you need help getting any information, I'll help you out with that.
Okay.
We've got about
Actually,
20 and wanted to make sure that we hear from any of your issues that you concerns that you've got. Gary Jacob from LNG, we heard from him a little bit earlier when we were speaking to. Anything else you wanted to talk about the process that you have to go through, Gary, when you remove an abandoned boat and try to find its owner?
Well, thank y'all for having me first off. I appreciate it. Right now, I think we just have to, I think Tom's going to call me later this week. We'll sit down and see if we can't get it back to the way it was. Information handling is the key. Current and up to date as well as can be expected with the boating public. And we know sometimes that does slip through. But as far as the disposal and all that, I'm still working that out personally, just working through how to handle it, which is why I'm on this group. I want to see what options we can get for disposal. Obviously, with us being landbound or landlocked on Lake Anna, but there are other issues we have as far as the landfills not taking things of that nature. But just work on the laws. That's where the first change needs to be made, because there's nobody that wants to do this, because my road towing contract is very ABCD. My marine towing contract and my salvage contract, that is like trying to navigate New York without a map. If this, then you have to do this, then you have to do this. And the Storage Act is 55.1 -2900 to 2906. And that Storage Act deals directly with land-based storage operations. If we salve a boat and we take it to our storage lot, we're not covered under that. We're covered under the Marine Salvers Act, which we all know the Jones Act only covers you on navigable waters. We're not even covered by the Jones Act for disposing salvage vessels. Captain Peters with the Stafford Sheriff's Office, he's trying diligently to see what we can do, because we're close to a lake, and the lake boaters are the smaller, have to register through Department of Wildlife in Richmond. I think that's where the laws need to start at, possibly just retooling what we have to current 2021 standards as opposed to 80 and 90 standards, I believe is what Tom was talking about in the original meeting. The laws have become antiquated for our digital life. And I don't know if Captain Peters would like to add anything else in, but like I said, we're doing our best working with Game and Fisheries, and possibly having Game and Fisheries establish, or local law enforcement establish, a group of vetted towers that are certified and qualified and understand the way to do things and understand the constraints of, if you can't find an owner, you're going to be saddled with this and this expense. But we're working to mitigate that by doing this. And just, we have to be vetted to be on the road towing for the sheriff's office and state police. Work on something to deal with abandoned derelict vessels, where you vet somebody, background, criminal history, so on and so forth, and say, this is what we're dealing with. This is what you have to do. Let's go from here. I don't know, any input on that would be grateful and helpful.
Jeff, I don't know if you're waiting for Katie, I don't know, but I wanted to just ask a quick question if I could, as a follow-up.
Sure.
So all of this discussion, it seems like, and this is something Jesse and Anthony and I have talked about, that it seems like there are really two groups of boat owners. One is the boat owner that is trying to get rid of that boat. It's a maintenance mess. They've left it moored offshore till it is no longer usable, or they've put a hole in the hull and scraped off the identification number and, sunk it. Or it's someone who is in a senior home and no longer competent, or passed away, or they're overseas for an assignment, or just somehow it's gotten away from them, but the owner is identifiable, and maybe there's money through the owner or their estate if the laws are set up that way. And so I didn't know if, is Major Meyer still with us? Yes. If North Carolina has different approaches that they take in any way in their laws to those two distinct groups, or if law enforcement in this meeting might take two different approaches. You hear all the time that result that was discussed earlier, that courts don't want to take a stand because, first of all, you put a penalty on somebody with no money. It's a dry well. What's the point of the exercise? We run into that in all kinds of realms, septic system failures, et cetera, right? So there's got to be a better way to do that. But does anyone out there approach those two groups of owners differently?
Elizabeth, we really don't. I mean, it's just, the law is the law, and it's pretty consistent, standardly applied. It's just, if our law requires, it puts strict liability on the registered boat owner, that they are responsible for any cost incurred by the state. Even, we have an 80-foot shrimp trawler right now that the guy wrecked off at Hatteras on the Storm, and now it's sitting on Hatteras half buried. It probably cost him $150,000. That's, we're applying the law consistently, and there's really no differentiation. We're looking at that, but if we can get money, I'm sure we'll try. But for the most part, I'd say the huge majority of these, like you said, I think the well's going to be dry when it comes to getting money from the owner, if we can determine the owner.
But how about, do you do, thank you for that, not on the enforcement end, but on the outreach end? I'm wondering, do you do any outreach, to marinas? Did you all talk about giving either a state agency or marinas the authority to do periodic inspections and report problems with vessels about to become derelict, anything like that?
Well, we really hadn't got that far, but most of the marinas, we identified as many as we could, and if they have issues, we'll have a reporting system where they can report, and we will go do an investigation like anything else. And if it meets the definition by law, then we'll move forward with the procedure, but a lot of times they don't. If it meets requirements and it comes into the definition of an ADV, then we'll start our procedure, and if it gets to the point, we'll remove it.
Thank you.
I guess,
To
Jeff,
add on, go ahead, Neil.
I was just gonna say, can you get copies of the North Carolina laws? So we know how far they've gotten, and they have some, sounds like they have some pretty good ideas.
Yes, we can definitely be in touch. Katie's worked with Major Meyer more, but we're both going to be in touch going forward with him and other states as well. So
Great. Thanks.
And just to let y'all know, North Carolina, we're not experts. You know, we're using what other people have done. I mean, I've really had a lot of contact with Florida. They've helped out a lot in their not reinventing the wheel, their mistakes and their continued efforts. I mean, it's a continual process. They're continually changing, and you just try to keep building on it. But I mean, we'll help you out as much as we can.
Thank you.
And to add that a comment came up about the definition of ADVs, that's something that we can research, Katie, myself, and the William & Mary folks, but that really is important. Going back to the beginning of this conversation about, you know, something that's just on land, something that's been removed, that's about to sink, and then something that's always been abandoned in the water and is would seemingly be more of a threat to the environment. But again, taking into account all these aspects, the cost, it's not just about the environment, it's about managing the cost and prioritizing in those projects. So how broad do we want to define ADVs as they are already defined in Virginia, or would that change through the working group's recommendations?
I guess I just had a question. Tim Dooley, are you on the call? Officer Dooley? I see him on there, but he just had as far as the inventory form, we had a problem with high water events in Smith Mountain Lake with boats drifting. I spoke to you about this yesterday, Jeff, and add something to that inventory form to help them, you know, report or people missing their boats, to help put them together with you know, the boats. We had quite a few boats that went drifting in Smith Mountain Lake with those events, and they were asking me about that, to attach something to the inventory form. We were able to do that.
You'll see that updated. It has some language. It's not just, you know, ADVs as or abandoned and derelict. It's also drifting or otherwise unmoored or secured. So stuff like that, the suggestions like in our phone call yesterday, I'm continuing to update that form. The link's the same, so you should be able to see those changes in real time.
And you said that might be posted early March on your website?
The survey is being distributed as, and first Ed tell it with Waterway Guide to the coastal marinas, but Neil, that's something that you could distribute too. And I'd be happy to share that again with you for the inland areas. And then with Lake Anna, we're meeting with some folks, the Lake Anna Civic Association Friday. So that'll be just kind of the basic three. But then the April 3rd is going to be when the inventory is, April 30th, excuse me, is going to be when the inventory is posted based on that feedback from all those surveys. So that's sort of the closing window for those responses.
Okay.
To be added to the,
that'll be on the website?
yes.
Okay. And how will you get it out to the public besides flyers if somebody needs to report something? You know?
Working through the marinas once we have that inventory, and then also working with you all just to prioritize these things, because a big spreadsheet doesn't mean as much unless it's clearly shown to be in that person's backyard, literally, or that they kind of pop up as something where they can be a partner. So I think we're going to have the whole work group vet some of these draft final products and reports, not only the white paper, but the inventory, and that get into that prioritization work. And then we'll have some more subcommittees. Right now we just have funding and policy, but we're going to get into the removal subcommittee will be formed within the next couple of weeks, and then the outreach. And I think that's really where you're going to see folks that are opening up their networks that have not yet weighed in, other than the general kickoff meeting last month. But those folks are going to really help us get the word out.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is Katie. I'm having connective issues here with my internet, but yeah, link shared with all of you for that online inventory in news, newsletter, emails. You can share it with whomever you wish, because we definitely want to get the word out to the public. Setting their dates in the next 4 or 5 weeks, looking at prevention and outreach, as well as removal next Friday, the 19th. So we just a few. Were there any other discussion? See, handled by this committee, and then we'll talk briefly about. We've got some.
Yeah, Katie, we're having trouble with the internet connection. I saw your message. I think she was just saying any more comments real quick on this sort of open discussion section, and then we'll try to move to nail down a tentative time for the next policy subcommittee meeting next month around this time.
No, we're
Can
pretty.
everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, or at least I can hear you fine. I don't know if we're short on time, but I can give us a quick overview of that insurance discussion we had. We've kind of touched on some of the points already.
Yes, please do.
So we, Jesse and I last Friday talked to a representative from an insurance company about kind of the insurance aspect of ADVs. This was kind of like a broad scale discussion. But we're talking, the main thing, couple main things he pointed out would be like, as we talked about earlier, boat insurance is not mandated in Virginia, but the insurance industry in generally would be behind or would support mandating insurance, mainly for the fact that they would just sell more policies. That'd be, kind of instant business boost for them. Public reaction to that is unknown. And also we were talking about kind of the requiring insurance for the disposal and salvage. Salvage could be, doesn't seem to be traditionally covered in boat insurance, but it could be added. But it would be like actually covering disposal would be something the insurance companies would most likely not do, because insurance is kind of like, based on risk, and disposing of something is not really a risk. It's just like it's more of a fact, and they would not really be supportive of doing that, because that would just be like very, that would be a certain payout for them, which they don't want to do. And so let me just.
Yeah, it's more of just the fact that when you think about insurance policies, you think about an event that happens. So a car crash, and then your car might become totaled, but then you get a payout and you get a new car. Whereas with eventual salvaging and disposal of a boat is an inevitability that is not tied to insurance typically. So it's not the right vehicle to use to pay for that typically. So yeah, like Anthony mentioned, you could write that in, and John was not sure how they would do that. So he was actually going to talk to some of the actual policy writers at his company and get back to us. John's background was not specifically in boating insurance, so he's going to talk to someone and get back to us and either connect us with someone or at least connect us to someone who can answer our questions over email. But yeah, that's the main thing. And he did mention, and we had a short discussion just about like what the whether like registration would spread the I'm using the word risk, but spread the cost of this over the populace better than an insurance policy would. So we talked about that. And of course, that's something we touched on in this discussion, is that the US Coast Guard apparently does not like that. And that's something I need to delve into more and see what the reasoning behind that is, and whether that's something that could change maybe as political will changes at the federal level. But it is strange to have US Coast Guard, who registers boats on their own, telling states that they're unable to use registration as a vehicle to pay for salvage and disposal. And Anthony, you had anything else to add about the insurance discussion?
Yeah, so John had mentioned kind of what Jesse just said, like if they are forced to cover like forced to cover salvage operations and like boat recovery, that's going to raise premiums for their customers by like a substantial amount, which might be very, very unpopular. Not for the insurance company. The insurance companies will raise the rates if they need to, but their customers, especially the customers who probably don't want this insurance, they might not be super happy about their rates going up to cover other people's irresponsibilities of not being able to dispose of their boats properly.
Just to add in on the registrations, I guess it's because CFR requires states to register boats according to what the Coast Guard says, according to their model, and it's got a federal preemption on it, and then somehow that ties into the funding model. When you sign the financial agreement agreeing to those documents, you say that you'll follow all their rules, and that's where the teeth come into it, where they don't allow states to do that kind of thing. And I guess I understand it from their point of view, because they'd have 56 states and territories in DC charging anything from $30 to $150 to register a boat for 3 years, because they would add in every kind of hidden fee known to man, and it could get out of hand really quick, because you're dealing with zebra mussels and invasive species and derelict boats and pollution. And California would probably charge you $1,000 to register for 3 years, not to pick on them, but Maryland wouldn't be far behind. Just a thought.
So one thing that it didn't really come up today, but we were talking to John about is, would it be possible to kind of lobby Congress to kind of get us around this loophole, or maybe even instead of having like a hidden fee, be very clear that, or maybe lobby it so the Coast Guard would allow, specifically like ADV, like a tax to fund ADV on registrations, but only that, instead of, still keep their prohibitions on other like hidden fees and stuff. Would that be something possible?
It might be, but I think it's quagmired down in not so much in their CFRs. It's probably in the CFRs that cover grant funding and the financial piece. So I could do some checking and find out, if it's U.S. code and code of federal regs, that's a slow process at best. But I'll see if I can find out more specifics on where that comes from. But
Well, I mean, you can also just
I imagine it's
register.
in several different places.
Sorry, Tom. I was just saying, you could also just register your boat through the Coast Guard and just avoid Virginia. So that, I mean, it's just a bad policy, both at the federal level and at the state level, apparently.
Yeah, the problem is if we register boats through the Coast Guard, not Virginia, our agency would lose millions and millions of dollars.
Well, that's what a lot of people
and
do.
We're self-funded. Well, we're self-funded, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bizarre incentive that the Coast Guard sets up, and the federal state, it's the reason why there's a 0.08 DUI at every state now. It's because the federal government otherwise would keep DOT dollars from flowing in. So yeah, I understand how they do it and why they do it, but it just seems like bad policy. I'll have to look into more.
I think I agree with Tom to have it as a separate fee, not attach it to the registration. I think it just opens up a quagmire, as he said. Just make it separate. I guess that has to be done through legislation. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I mean, we do, like we do a saltwater license and a coastal license through our licensing system. So it really would probably just be some sort of permit or decal or user fee that would be required as the way our licensing system works. So if you went to register a boat and you didn't pay for your $10 or whatever license fee or user fee, it wouldn't allow you to register your boat. So you'd have to do that first as a prerequisite. So that's pretty easy to set up, but it would be a code change through legislation.
That sounds like the way to go, instead of attaching it to the registration.
An agency can't charge a fee without General Assembly authorization, then, because they can't spend funds that don't go through the appropriation process for the Constitution. But, a report that Katie sent out noted that in France, they impose a fee on their boat manufacturers that goes into a fund to then fund salvage or derelict vessels. So I thought that was, and plus an environmental fee. I don't know what that means. I'd have to read the report in detail to find out what that means.
Yeah, and I would add that I'm on the ABA. It's the Angling and Boating Alliance up in DC, and we work on the reauthorization for the Sportfish Recreation Boating Trust Fund every 5 years. And that's going through reauthorization right now, and it got pushed back because of the administration change. But they're also looking at how to add in some sort of excise tax for derelict vessels and an excise tax on paddlecraft because the amount of paddlecraft that are coming into the United States now and being sold.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, this is Katie. One of the concerns that was brought up a few times by people, I think including Major Meyer, is if a fund is established for derelict vessels, does that encourage boat owners to say, hey, I paid $4 a year for the last 10 years. I'm going to assume that the state's going to take care of getting rid of my boat when I'm ready to get rid of my boat. So we do have to figure that question out too, how to not disincentivize boat owners from still doing the right thing, disposing of their boats correctly. Unless we go with a model like in California where they have a voluntary turn-in program where any boat owner can go to one of the partner marinas who are under contract with the state, and they can, as long as they can show title, they can turn in their vessel. So anyway, we want to be careful we don't undo the good work that most boaters are doing to dispose of their boats correctly.
All right, so thanks again for that update, Jesse and Anthony. Are we all ready, as we're 4 minutes over here, to pick a tentative date for the next policy subcommittee meeting? We're thinking mid-March. There's Monday the 15th, Wednesday the 17th, and Friday the 19th. I can just, if those sound agreeable, I can send out a doodle poll or something, or if we feel like we can get a couple ayes here. Tuesday and Thursday are the only days we can't do it. So we're pretty open morning and afternoon on Monday the 15th, morning only Wednesday the 17th, and then either afternoon or morning on Friday the 19th. And it would be the similar length, about an hour and a half. See if we can maybe the raise the hand function or thumbs up.
Yeah, I guess send it out and see what people like.
All right. So we'll either do a doodle poll, or we'll just send out a time, or one of those days, and then those times. So, all right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for your time and interest and help in this important issue here. And we might see some of you for the call next Friday for the funding committee. Thanks again. And anything else for us? Nope.
Thanks for the
All right.
discussion.
Well, thanks again. Sorry we ran over a little bit.
Thanks for the discussion. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.